Mankind's greatest evil is not that we treat people the way we treat animals, but that we treat animals the way we treat animals. Because when we take stock of our condition with a slightly wider lens, the difference fades away. What does it mean for mankind to truly recognize that he is an animal? To walk outside and see the squirrels frantically foraging for enough food to sustain them through the long, violently cold winter. The birds pecking for scraps wherever they can be found. The dogs being led on their daily walks, leashed to their masters. What does it take to see beyond the differences of our appearance and understand that we are subject to the same wants and the same struggles as the non-human animals with which we share the planet? This is the central question in Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, a book that created such a massive cultural shockwave, it changed the way the American food system operates, influencing the creation of the FDA and potentially saving countless lives through the reform of food safety laws. But looking back on his novel, its reception by the public, and its influence on politicians, including then-President Theodore Roosevelt, Sinclair wasn't content. I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, I hit it in the stomach. In The Jungle, Sinclair describes the Chicago meatpacking industry at the turn of the 20th century, the state of which was so unbelievably sickening, the government launched a series of investigations that unearthed a sobering truth, that the depravity in Sinclair's book was not just fiction, but an accurate journalistic portrayal of the kind of evils that become prevalently mundane during unchecked industrialization. Sinclair's book is filled with descriptions of animal cruelty. The workers treat the animals in unimaginable ways, dismembering their bodies in the most brutal fashion without any consideration for their personhood. They are fleshy machines to be devoured in totality, to be stripped of everything they are worth. They use everything from the pig, except the squeal. In The Jungle, it's shown for what it truly is, a greedy, scraping addiction that causes the most sickening, disgusting behavior imaginable. But the cows and pigs aren't the only victims. When people become inured to regular violence, their empathy shrinks. They lose an important sensitivity to the evident distress right in front of their faces, literally desensitized. Soon, their speciesism alone is not enough to limit their harm to just cows and pigs. There is but scant account kept of cracked heads in back of the yards, for men who have to crack the heads of animals all day seem to get into the habit, and to practice on their friends, and even on their families between times. Similar to the health conditions Sinclair observed, this sad fact plays out to this day. The Global Health Review from Yale reports that slaughterhouse workers have much higher cases of PTSD, domestic abuse, violent crime, and even suicide. It's so prevalent, the effect has received its own diagnosis, PITS, perpetration-induced traumatic stress. Contrary to common knowledge, Sinclair doesn't confine his concern to the kill floors of the meatpacking plant. He shows us, throughout the novel, what animals we are in our relationship to our environment, both natural and economic. Starvation and exposure are monsters hovering over our characters' shoulders, looming in the shadows, ready to make their danger felt at the first opportunity. In fact, hunger and cold are two of the chief villains of the book, terrorizing the poor who don't have the means to stave off their attacks. Anytime our characters are out of work or low on money, they become immediately vulnerable, bringing out the base animalistic terror of not enough. Not enough food, not enough warmth, not enough shelter. The horrific story of young Stanislavus stays with me the most. A boy so affected by the cold that he lives in a state of terror every winter, having to be beaten each morning to be forced to leave the home and go to work. One bitter morning in February, the little boy who worked at the lard machine with Stanislavus came about an hour late, and screaming with pain, they unwrapped him, and a man began vigorously rubbing his ears. And as they were frozen stiff, it only took 2 or 3 rubs to break them short off. As a result of this, little Stanislovas conceived a terror of the cold that was almost a mania. It is only natural that such severe want of rudimentary biological necessities will lead people to desperation. When the only thing standing between yourself and death is a warm meal, a warm coat, or a warm place to sleep, and the only thing that separates you from these treasures is a few dollars, it's enough to drive anyone mad. There is one kind of prison where man is behind bars, and everything that he desires is outside. And there is another kind where the things are behind the bars, and the man is outside. This is the recurring struggle Jurgis faces over and over and over again in the novel. Whether it's because he's injured, imprisoned, or impoverished, he finds himself in need of a world where the necessities are just out of reach. But it isn't clear why. Jurgis starts the novel strong of body, brimming with an enthusiastic desire to apply himself to his work, and a tenacity of spirit to overcome any obstacle. These things are stripped from Jurgis one by one, while others, devoid of these virtues, live a life of comfort and ease. Sinclair explains it like this, using the petty crimes of the poor as a foil to those in power. They were swindlers and thieves of pennies and dimes, and they had been trapped and put out of the way by the swindlers and thieves of millions of dollars. Sinclair highlights this injustice for the remainder of the book, as Jurgis becomes politically motivated, becoming involved in unions, politics, and eventually the revolutionary socialist movement of his time. This broadening of scope is what makes the jungle such an effective motivator for social change. Sinclair starts with Jurgis's experience, expands to his fictional environment, to the broader socio-political implications in the narrative, then leaps across the page until we are forced to contemplate our own environment, our own participation in systematic cruelty, our own involvement in a fallacious zero-sum system where for one to have, there necessitates one to have not. Jurgis recollected how, when he had first come to Packingtown, he had stood and watched the hog killing and thought how cruel and savage it was, and come away congratulating himself that he was not a hog. Now his new acquaintance showed him that a hog was just what he had been, one of the packers' hogs. What they wanted from a hog was all the profits that could be got out of him, and that was what they wanted from the working man, and also that was what they wanted from the public. What the hog thought of it and what he suffered were not considered, and no more was it with labor, and no more with the purchaser of meat. What we find is that when we brutalize animals, ignoring their tears, their cries of anguish, when we take away their individuality, commodify their very existence, we're brutalizing ourselves. We're stripping each other of the things we claim make us human: compassion, empathy, love. We're buying and selling each other as living stock.